The University of Virginia is working to honor slaves who built the school. Construction crews are preparing UVA grounds to create room for a memorial to enslaved laborers.
Kitty Foster was a free black woman who owned property on the other side of the university.
Andrea Douglas is the co-chair of UVA's President's Commission on the Age of Segregation. Douglas is also the executive director of the Jefferson School of African American Heritage. She says Foster's home was discovered in 2009 during the university's South Lawn project.
UVA went through an entire process of trying to identify descendants, and they did in fact find two strains of descendants. One strain of descendants who clearly understood that they were black, and another strain of descendants that clearly understood that they were white. And we in Charlottesville live with these kinds of stories every single day.
The University of Virginia was founded in 1819 in Charlottesville by U.S. President Thomas Jefferson. But Jefferson died on July 4th the same year.
I was one of the members of the steering committee for the President's Commission on Slavery at the university. And I ended up being on the Monument Committee. And I think I made an argument not just for the group that ultimately created the design for it, but I also made an argument for the location. There are several locations under consideration. One more deeply into the university, which wasn't very accessible. You know, you had to be very intentional about arriving at that site. The second one was the site of the hospital, not the university hospital, but the original hospital. And again, a difficult site to get to. And then the third was this site where it's actually located now. And I advocated for that site largely because of its proximity to the road, largely because it would make a monument accessible to the people of Charlottesville, who largely, if you're trying to get to UVA, it's difficult to park. It's not as welcoming to the African American community, at least at the time that we were having those conversations. I think the university has worked very hard to make themselves much more open to this community now. But at the time, which was 2 years ago that this conversation was being had, I felt as if it were necessary to really think about a site that would allow the greatest number of people moving around this very busy corner to have access to it, and for it to be visible from the road even if you were driving past. But I also was involved from the point of view of the community engagement piece, really trying to help to bring Charlottesville into the process, to find a place of acceptance of these objects and a place where they could have real conversation about the meaning and help to form the object beyond the university. It's my idea that we talk a lot about this town-gown relationship, but very many of us who have any kind of affiliation with the university didn't just arrive here. There are some who are new faculty, but for me, I came as a graduate student. Right? I have a very long history as a graduate student, the only PhD in art history of a person of color ever given by the University of Virginia. I hold that. I was the curator of their museum from 2005 through 2010 when I left. I have taught classes there. And so my relationship to that institution is both internal and external. And so the Heritage Center became instrumental in engaging the community because we have the facility, we have the capacity, we have the trust of the African American community that has, for not just the period of enslavement, built the university, but the university has been the largest employer of people of color in this community post-emancipation.
I mean, the university was built on their labor of men and women and children, and for a very long time, it was just sort of swept under the rug or ignored. And over the last few years, I think there's been a really good sort of amount of progress made towards maybe helping to heal a little bit and recognize their labor and their sacrifice and the fact that they were here in bondage.
Anthony Shinshang is a PhD student at UVA studying anthropology. Shinshang told me he was glad to see the memorial construction finally underway.
I think that the memorial is a good step. I don't know if it, I don't think it should be the only step, but I think that it's at least a step in the right direction.
I wanted to know his thoughts on the design for the memorial and its location.
It's a good design. I think that the way it sort of has a lot of allusions to like a broken shackle and space to have names engraved is important. And I also think it's really important that they've left space for the names that they don't have or the names that they might find in the future. And I'm also pretty excited about its location. I mean, it's right there across from the corner. You won't be able to walk by and, not see it. And I think that's really important because for so long, you walk by UVA and you just see this institution that wasn't fully integrated till 30 or 40 years ago, the 70s. And, it's such a powerful symbol of what it means to be wealthy and white in Virginia that I think it's good to put, a reminder right there in the front of whose backs it was built by and who did the work to make it happen.
Grace Tabor is a UVA student historical tour guide. She told me about the history of the Rotunda and Carbell Hall.
The Cabell Hall was built after the Rotunda Fire of 1895. So that was constructed between 1897 and 1900. So after the Rotunda burnt down, the university brought in Stanford White, who was a renowned architect from the firm McKim, Mead & White out of New York City. And they brought him in to help reconstruct the Rotunda and also to add the three buildings behind me here. So that's Cock Hall, Rouse Hall, and Cabell Hall. While they were originally built to enhance classroom space and kind of circle off this lawn, they also had a dual purpose that was approved by the Board of Visitors, which was to block out the free African-American community that was at the south of the lawn. So Jefferson's original idea for the academical village is that from the Rotunda, you would look directly behind me and see the Blue Ridge Mountains that kind of represented leaving the Rotunda and going out into the world to pursue education beyond the university. But by blocking out that free African-American community that was known as the Venable Lane community, or more familiarly to students at UVA, it was called Canada, because it was so close in proximity yet so different in culture from the entirely white UVA community. And so the Venable Lane community was really started and held together by a woman named Kitty Foster. But unfortunately, as soon as it was blocked out, the community continued to thrive internally, but was definitely excluded from this place. Her house has been commemorated behind Cabell Hall currently, and there's a structure called the Shadow House that is, it's basically a bunch of poles that together assemble when it's high noon. The shadow of it appears to be the floor plan of Kitty Foster's house, which is a good way to commemorate a really tough subject about the dual purpose of architecture here.
The UVA historian says Kitty Foster wanted integration.
She is just remembered as a big proponent of kind of integration within Charlottesville, but really early on in an age of lots of segregation. So she was the community leader within the Venable Lane community that was then shut off from UVA. But she's remembered as kind of the founder and the strongest force in that community.
UVA's former president, Teresa Sullivan, began a project by creating commissions to further research and underscore the role slaves played in constructing the school. The President's Commission on Slavery and the university was formed in 2013. The President's Commission on the Age of Segregation was formed in 2018. It focuses on the next 100 years of the university's history, decades after 1865. Douglas worked as the curator for UVA's Fraley Museum of Art. Her first exhibition was on the work of Carrie Mae Weems.
And at that point, the work was considering DNA and the implications of DNA. And one of the panels in the work was about Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. And in 2005, the Jefferson Foundation, or the Friends of Jefferson, were far from willing to make an association between Hemings and Jefferson. And that's in 2005. And it was only because the DNA actually proved that the Hemings descendants were Jefferson's children that this even became an accepted notion.
I will be continuing this series on UVA's Memorial to Enslaved Laborers. The memorial is scheduled to be unveiled in October. In Charlottesville, Elaine Rackley for Breaking Through News.